Hello, this is Defiance Illusion coming at you live. How y'all doing? Wanted to hit on 80s bands and the difference between the music then and now, including how they recorded. In the 80s, we had probably the best guitar players and music of all time. I'm not trying to poke, and make nobody mad or anything, but we did. We had the best guitarists in the world, man. And, you know, Richie Blackmore, he started in the 60s actually, but when he hit the 80s, he really blossomed into his own and he left Deep Purple, went back to Rainbow, and, it was a back and forth deal. But Richie Blackmore's definitely, he's the man. And whether they like to admit it or not, when you're talking about the 80s rock and metal scenes, that spawned Metallica, that spawned Godsmack, that spawned Alice in Chains, that spawned all that, Pearl Jam. It made all that music come out. Guitar playing got dumbed down. Beats got used over and over and over, and that became very redundant. Bands that I think of when I think about the 80s was like Black Sabbath, Quiet Riot, Motley Crue, Van Halen, definitely. Eddie Van Halen and Van Halen put their mark on the 80s big time. Much bigger with Sammy, in my humble opinion, than with Dave, because Dave really wasn't with them as long as Sammy. Dave did, 3 or 4 albums with them, and then here comes Sammy, and Sammy just lamb blasted. Everything was a hit. Sammy Hagar, he's the man. What can you say? The dude, and they say he's a really great guy to sit down, just have a drink with and talk. He's a normal dude. Eddie Van Halen, Rip. Oh man, that was hard. They'll never be. What Jimi Hendrix did, yes, was very important. Yes, to rock and roll, absolutely. But in my opinion, Van Halen surpassed him by mountains, leaps, bounds, and continents. He way surpassed Hendrix. And like I've seen him on an interview where he said, "I never claimed I invented tapping. He said I just mastered it." How can you argue with that? Other bands came out that didn't get so much play that were really, really, really great bands like XYZ and Steelheart. And oh my God, that guy can sing in Steelheart. But also your progressive rock came out of the 80s type of style, and they record a lot like the 80s people did. You got the guitarist going in with the drummer, and they lay down the basic tracks, and then they bring in the lead singer and he sings, and then you got the bass line being laid out either on a computer, or you got a bass player that comes in and actually plays it. That's the way they did it in the 80s. That's the way they're going back to now. Yes, it's more expensive because there's different things going on at different times. It's not all one shot, one time, one day. That's it. Which was what they did with like Pearl Jam and all them kind of guys. It's a different type of way to make music. Dan, I'm not slacking on, Pearl Jam. I didn't care for Nirvana. Never cared for Nirvana, and I get slacked on that all the time. But I didn't. I hate what happened to the guy. I don't wish that on no one. I never liked Nirvana though. But like I was saying, in the 80s, lots of bands were swept under the carpet that were really awesome, like Fastway. They were from Germany. They broke with Say What You Will. As far as I know, that was an original by them. And then they did a soundtrack, and then they disappeared. They did a soundtrack for Trick or Treat, and they made a bunch of money, and they just disappeared. For the most part. I mean, they was out of the limelight at that point. The metal and rock band that kicked off the video sensation of MTV was definitely Quiet Riot with Mental Health. That I remember that video like it just literally came out. It had that little horror edge to it because, of course, the Jason mask on him, and he's in a straight jacket and running down hallways, and I mean, it's different. It's different. And if you listen to the song, it's an awesome song. Another great act that got shuffled around and forgotten about, Vixen. I mean, yes, they were all girls. They rocked their ass off, man. They were great. Joan Jett, Lita Ford. Gotta give props to the ladies. Mostly Joan Jett with me. Joan Jett was not only like a heartthrob. I know it's weird to hear a guy say that, but man, I had a crush on her. Oh my God. Joan Jett was like the most gorgeous woman in the world when I was growing up. I mean, the women I dated looked like her. Had a woman I dated that even sounded like her. But yeah, there's probably 12, 13 years between our age. But hey, man, she's still out there doing her thing. I'm proud of her. There are new bands that I like, such as Nightwish. Love their work. War Kings, Frozen Crown, Release the Archers, Melissa Bonney. Big fan of hers. Oh man, she's awesome. Awesome vocalist and composer. Also, I mean, Cobra and the Lotus. These new progressive rock bands are just awesome. I mean, they're definitely groups to check out. And I mean, if you're into the rock scene, you know what I'm saying. These guys are really putting some stuff out that's impressive, man. And for the most part, they all got women, and not all, but like I said, the most part, they got women front men. That's kind of a weird thing, weird way to put it, but you know what I mean. But hey, man, if it works, go for it. Go for it. Do it. I was a big fan of Ronnie James back in the 80s. And I liked, on hindsight, I really enjoyed Ronnie James Dio with Black Sabbath more than I did Ozzy with Black Sabbath. I get a lot of flack over that. I know. But let's be honest. I mean, Dio, he's the voice of heavy metal, man. I mean, that dude invented it. He yes, Ozzy's the prince of whatever, and the Godfather. They tried to say it, and that got shut down real quick because Ronnie's voice is just. I mean, I put Ronnie and the only person that really reminds me of Ronnie, even near Ronnie, is either Jorn or Sully Erna. If you don't know who Jorn is, check him out. The dude is impressive. I mean, he can sing his ass off. Pull up on YouTube, Jorn Burn. He did a cover. He does a lot of cover music, and he goes in, sings one time like Ronnie James did, and not like Ronnie James. Ronnie James, he put a lot of work into his stuff, but I was thinking of David Coverdale. Sorry. David Coverdale's known to go in one time, one cut. That's all you get. At least that's the way he was back in the day. David Coverdale came out with Whitesnake, and then he did Coverdale Page. Then he did reinvented Whitesnake. He actually blossomed out of Deep Purple, when Richie Blackmore had enough of Ian's BS at the time. And they just wasn't getting along. Ian left, and Blackmore was grateful when he went. He brought in David Coverdale, and They did some really amazing work together, man. I mean, Stormbringer and Burn and all. I mean, oh my God, you know, and those songs are like icons today. I mean, they really and I don't use that word loosely. Those songs are really iconic today. It's like they're the bridge to get you over to the other side, you know, to where you're playing like that. You know, that's the songs that where you break out the mainstream. You know, Smoke on the Water, that's the beginner's riff of every guitarist, bass player and drummer, and lead singer for that matter. But, you know, how can I say this? Smoke on the Water and Stairway to Heaven and all that, they've had their day. They've had their moment in the sun. You know, Stairway to Heaven, of course, came out in the 70s, not the 80s, but it's probably the most requested song, I believe they said, of all time on the radio worldwide. Stairway to Heaven. But back to the 80s thing, there were so many bands that got swept under the carpet. I mean, like Firehouse, you know, even some older bands like Cheap Trick got swept under the cover, and they were awesome bands, man. I mean, these guys could really jam their ass off and was putting out solid, hard music. But because of the hype with, you know, what did they wear and all that kind of, it became more about that in the 80s for some reason than the music. And the music was just so phenomenal and staggering that there's nothing that's been like it since. You know, and for that matter, I mean, stepping away from the music just for just a brief second about the 80s, I remember Kings Island in the 80s, you know, and growing up on the cartoons we grew up on, which was Hanna-Barbera instead of that Walt Disney junk, you know. And I'm not trying to slack on nobody, but just not a Disney fan. You know, I was always a Looney Tunes and Hanna-Barbera and Tom and Jerry type of guy, you know. I like to laugh. But anyway, back to the music. We had some of the greatest guitar companies, and they're still trying to mimic that to this day. They're trying to bring those companies back out. Matter of fact, Gibson bought Kramer, like I'd mentioned in a previous video. You know, Kramer was a major player in the 80s as far as guitars went, because they came out with the Night Swan and all that, all these different guitars. You might remember it was the Strat style body, and it had the lightning with the blue clouds on it. It was a beautiful guitar. They made it for Vivian Campbell. Phenomenal player. Started with Dio, and now he's in Def Leppard, which was a huge band in the 80s as well. I want to give props to them, definitely. You know, even though they came from across the pond like Fastway did. You know, Fastway came from Germany, Def Leppard came from the UK. You know, I got to give props, man. They were awesome, and they still are. I mean, their music to this day resonates. I mean, it's just incredible. You know, it's like the 80s is just stuck in a void in time, and it's just echoing throughout the other the other generations and stuff now. And you know, I heard a very famous country singer say to a guy that was trying to cover an 80s song on The Voice, Blake Shelton said, when you're doing an 80s song, you're walking on sacred ground when you're doing 80s rock. He said that's considered sacred ground. And I never really thought about it until he said that. And I was like, you know what? He's right. You know, we did more in the 80s. I mean, you know, MTV came out. There were more rock stations. People took care of themselves. They wasn't all doped out. The music spoke to, I mean, when I say music speaks to you, I mean, it was like the 80s music would reach down in your soul and just talk to you. You know, it would soothe you in times of need, and it would build you up, you know, in times of need. It was inspiring, and it was life changing, really. I mean, the music was just bigger than life back then. And you also have to remember on the other side of the spectrum, you had all these preachers knocking rock and roll, and it was like, so that was adding a lot of fuel to the fire because, as they say in show business, publicity, period, is good. It don't matter if it's bad, don't matter if it's good. Any publicity is great publicity because it's free. And every time that, one of these guys went after Ozzy, it's what made Ozzy. If it wasn't for, honestly, if it wasn't for certain preachers, going after him the way, as hard and the way that they went after him, Ozzy probably wouldn't have done half of what he did. He wouldn't have been around. I mean, I'm sorry, but except for Bark at the Moon, the song, and Rock and Roll Rebel, you can throw that whole record away because it's trash. I mean, Ozzy had a phenomenal record with Ultimate Sin. Yes, absolutely. And then I didn't really care for his first album with Zakk Wylde. Um, but No More Tears was phenomenal. I actually, back in the day when I was in the business, I had a chance to come into it and to help a couple of big shots. And because of what a friend that was a lot further in the business than I was at the time, he reached out to me because he'd heard that I was going to go to work for a certain camp. And this is a very true story. And I'd been contacted by a nice woman from Sony, and I'd been talking to Bruh from BMG Music at that time, or EMG Music, I'm sorry. And, it's been a long time, so please excuse me if I'm saying, any of the like letters wrong or whatever. It's just been a very long time. We're talking 30 years ago. Um, but anyway, yeah, I was warned about working with a particular person because the way they treated their guitarists and the way that they treated their songwriters and stuff they were doing to people at that time. And I was like, well, I ain't going to go work for them. They're going to do me like that. And I got to go get attorneys. And, I can't afford all that. They'd get a free ride. No, I ain't going to do that. So I turned it down. And that made some people mad. Made a lot of people mad. They were already setting me up with, they was going to put me up in an apartment. They was going to pay my apartment up for a year, give me a car, bring me out to Cali, put me on Sunset Strip, and I've been working with some people. Now, no doubt if I'd have went out there, I'd have ended up working for other people because that would have been my doorway in. But you have to think about what's also inside your heart. And I waited out, and even my mother, as much as I loved her, God rest her soul, and still love her, she was even planning on me leaving. She was preparing for me to leave because she kept on making reference to, oh, your brothers ain't never going to believe this, and because she was actually on. I had her listening on a phone call that we did a conference call on with some nice people, over to record industry, and my mom she's on the other phone in the same room, and I'm on the cordless phone because we didn't have cell phones back then. And she's hearing all this whole conversation, and she's got her hand over the mic, so that they can't hear her even breathe. And she's listening to everything because I just wanted a witness. That's all I wanted. In case anything was said or done, she knew who basically to blame. And she could not believe, yes, I was on my way. And then I put the brakes on. Now I'm on my way again. So I'll keep you all informed on what's going on with that. And in the 80s, until really the Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses fall out, most of the bands, for the most part, got along, or they just didn't say nothing negative about each other. And to be honest with you, Guns N' Roses asked for an ass whipping. I mean, I'm sorry, I'd had to go with Vince on that one. I think he would chew Axel up and spit him out. Vince is a brawler. You know, he don't play. And Axel, I mean, there's nothing flacking on him. You know, he probably can fight, but just something tells me my money would have gone on Vince. Uh, Vince Neil, you know, he was great singer, great performer, drove people crazy, and you know, the women went caca over the guy. I mean, he literally, you know, Nikki said he didn't think he could sing that good. Well, he got you signed, okay, and that's what I would always point out to Nikki. You know, yes, you fired your meal ticket, so don't tell me how smart you are. You know, that's where me and Nikki Six we kind of go like this, and I side with Sully. You know, because I don't think Nikki is all that. He's you know good as a great writer, great writer. I mean, he can if he went back to writing the way he was meant to write, which is the '80s style. Oh my God! I mean, Motley Crue would be back in the limelight in like a couple of hours. That would break news. They would have so many hits. I mean, the thing about the last record that they really did with Vince Neil in the '80s, break or coming out of the '80s, was Doctor Feelgood, and that was just freaking huge, man. It was like, oh my God, you know, and they still tour on that album to this day. You know, it's kind of like Def Leppard's Hysteria. You know, you got a record that everybody likes so much you can tour on it anytime you want and keep it going for 40 years. You know, I mean, Jesus, man, these guys were putting out iconic tunes. Now, Def Leppard was a lot more poppy than like a Motley Crue or an Ozzy, but and that was a hell of a combination to tour together. They cut a wide swath through America. That was a devastating tour. I remember reading because I always used to get those music magazines back in the day when I was a kid, you know, and I always got heavy metal and there was another one I used to get, and there was also a guitar magazine I used to get. I used to get these every month, and that's how I stayed current with everything going on, you know. But oh my God, man, Motley Crue and Ozzy, they destroyed everything they touched when they toured together. I mean, they were like in this competition to who could do the most damage to wherever they went. You know, it's like, oh my God. And Ozzy at the time, he had probably one of the best guitarists of the day with Jake E. Lee. I mean, the guy is phenomenal, you know, and I believe what he says about, you know, the days back then. I don't know about the whole replacing Mick Mars thing. I can't even imagine that because back in that day, that's before Mick really took to being sick, as far as I know. And Mick was really on his game, man. I mean, he was coming out with some blues riffs and pumping them up and putting them through a metal cabinet. And it was like, oh, man, yeah, I like that. You know, turn that guitar into a chainsaw. I like that. You know, Wild Side. Oh, hell yeah. You know, and Ozzy's like touring with them. I think it was on their Shout at the Devil tour or something like that. I mean, oh my God, it was just unreal. They were destroying everything. And, you know, back in the day, you got to remember that Vince Neil and Tommy Lee were best friends. And then Tommy, I don't know if he's schizophrenic or what, but man, you know, him and Vince, I mean, he turned on Vince like a viper, man, when he got canned out of Motley. I mean, he turned on him like a viper. I mean, that if I'd been Nikki, I'd been looking at Tommy like, dude, are you for real? You're the one that brought him in the band to begin with, and now you turn on your so-called best friend, you know, and it got really sick. I mean, you know, when Vince had that surfboarding accident and all that, or something like, I think it was a surfboard or it was a jet ski, he really got screwed up. And they were making fun of him whether he lived or died. They said they didn't care. I mean, it was just some cold, callous type shit, man. I mean, you know, Motley, they've had their day. And on the positive side of it, you had Motley running like a fine old machine in the 80s. They were a fine tuned, fine oiled machine. And if you did something to one of them, they all four came in on you. I mean, it was just, they were a gang. And that's the way it's supposed to be when you're in a band. I mean, you don't mess with a member of the family. You just don't. Now, that I stand with Nikki on. That totally. But Nikki really, I mean, he was very honest in an interview that I saw with him when he said the first thing he should have done when he got rid of Vince was change the name of the band, because Vince was the voice and face and the guy out front with Motley Crue. But now Vince sang so high, he should have. And this I would say to people now that's coming into the industry: don't sing as high as you can all the time, because you're going to get older and you're not going to be able to hit those notes. And then when you're trying to perform them songs 10 years down the road, everybody's going to be laughing at you. I mean, look at what they do with Vince now. Now, he's dropped some weight. He's looking good. He's become a lot more fit and trim. He's a hell of a lot healthier, I guarantee you that. And he is singing better. But he's still not to what he used to be. He's older now. We got to give allowance for that. But it's hard to do when you hear him live and he's 8 octaves below where he was before. I mean, Vince Neil used to get pretty high, man. Kind of like, Sammy Hagar, he can still do it. And he's an older dude now, but he's great, man. I mean, the dude's, and Sammy Hagar had a hell of a run by himself in the 80s. I mean, wow. 3-Lock Box, Eagles Fly, which Eddie Van Halen actually worked with him on that one. I Don't Need Love. Oh, yeah, that song rips. I'll Find Love Again. I mean, I could go on and on with Sammy. I mean, he was just, everything he touched, man, I liked it. I really like Sammy Hagar. But on the other side of Sammy, there was like the Black Sabbaths and the Dios and all that. And that's predominantly where I stayed. I was really into the whole, Skid Row, Motley Crue, GNR, Ozzy, Dio, Black Sabbath, Saxon, kind of feel. I remember Grim Reaper. Most people, when you say Grim Reaper, they're like, oh, yeah, I know who the guy. No, there was a band called Grim Reaper in the 80s, and they rocked, man. They kicked ass. I mean, See You in Hell, my friend. I mean, come on. And then, like I said, a lot of great bands got shuffled around, and they lost their way after they got signed, because back in the 80s, it was like, and I don't know this because I didn't live through this part of it, but from the way I was told, the videos that I've seen and the things that I've been told from people in the industry, if you had a particular look that they could market, and that's basically what it was. The 80s was about marketing. It was about marketing that look. Aqua Velva was your best friend. Long hair on a man that went down to his ass, you were $1 million dream. Especially if you was a white boy with blonde hair. You were going to be rich. Just because you had hair, and if you could sing or play the guitar, you were going to be rich. That's just the way the 80s were. But they would take these guys like, I've heard people say that like they loaded certain individuals up in cars when they would sign with record companies, and the record companies were already ready for them. They'd take them up through Malibu Beach and stuff in California. What house do you like? And they go buy the house for them. Here's the keys. Here's the deed. It's yours. You're 21 years old and you own a mansion. I mean, come on. Or you're 18 years old and your dad's working at General Motors got 30 years in, worked like a slave all of his life, and you have literally made more money in one album than he's made in his entire life, and you're living in Malibu and he's living over in Detroit, Michigan or something, in a nice neighborhood, but it's not the Malibu Strip or the Malibu Beach or the Sunset Strip or anything like that. The Sunset Strip was pretty rough. I mean, I was a trucker for a while and I went through there, man. I couldn't believe people want to live in that, but it's nice to visit. I wouldn't want to live there, no. I wouldn't want to deal with California's laws by no means. If I ever moved out there, it would be strictly because of business. So you're hearing it right here, right now. I would move out there strictly because of business. I will always be from Ohio. I will always be a Buckeye. Even though football wise, I'm Irish all the way and I go Notre Dame. And I catch flack over that all the time as well. But back to the 80s. We had some of the greatest TV shows in the 80s, the best cartoons, the best guitar players, the best music, the best cars. America was still making their own cars at that time, and I mean, if you remember Miami Vice, the little black Ferrari, the Spider, I believe it was called. I don't know anybody who would not have taken that little Ferrari over the black Trans Am or the General E or whatever you want to put it up again. I'd take the Ferrari. I'm sorry. That little car would absolutely give you a nosebleed. I've heard people talk about those little cars to this day. And if I was Ferrari, I'd bring that car back. That car is like so iconic. It's just crazy. And that was the 80s all the way. I mean, that was a little two-seater Ferrari, man. But Miami Vice, I mean, and you had Magnum PI with Tom Selleck. Oh my God, yeah, we had the best shows. The 80s was the shit. 90s is where everything tanked. Everything tanked in the 90s, and pretty fast too. It was like by 94. Grunge had taken hold real hard. Rap was coming out. Country was making a comeback. And all they wanted to do was take that heavy metal artist that Al Gore silenced, which I cannot figure out how he did that. That's busting our Constitution. That's against the law. We have freedom of speech in this country, and that's what he went after. And there seems to be a thing with them people, They keep on going after freedom of speech and the right to bear arms and the right to protect yourself and the right to really do anything, the right to religion. They want to take it all away. I don't understand that, but okay, whatever, floats their boat. I'm just not going to deal with that. Those people I don't deal with. But we're not going to get political today. Try to keep it upbeat. And the 80s was very upbeat. Pastel colors were in. Clubs had light shows that would make today's firework displays look pathetic. The nightclubs just had phenomenal light. They had smoke machines, they had laser lights, they had what they called teardrops, starlights. They had all that stuff, man. It was just, you'd walk into one of our clubs in the 80s and you'd think that you're at a Kings Island. You're walking into a different world. The music was upbeat. Club wise, the R&B was the way to go, but the shows that you go and see, yeah, forget about R&B, man. I'm going to see the guys of metal. That's the people that I bought their albums. I bought their CDs. I bought their cassettes. That's how far back I go. Cassettes and the end of A tracks, that's how far back I go. And vinyl, yeah. I've still got some vinyl. I've still got Quiet Riot, Metal Health. I've still got Prince's Purple Rain. I got one unopened and one opened, and the one I opened is a black record. The one that I didn't open is supposed to be the actual purple record. And so that one ain't getting open. But that's over at somebody's house right now, where it can be watched. But anyway, um, we had much better homes then because everybody, even in trailer courts, took care of their houses. I mean, white people, and I'm not knocking no minorities whatsoever, but I'm just saying because I know because I was around white people, of course, because I'm white. I know personally white people, and I don't know about black folks or anybody else at the time. Not talking about nobody, not leaving nobody out, but I know that white people, again, because I'm white, were very tidy. They kept their house clean. They kept their lawn mowed. They kept their house painted. They went to work. They went to school. It was a different time, but there was a lot of dirty things going on too. Like if a school didn't like a kid or whatever, man, they could mess them up for life, man. I know people that have gone through hell with their school. Because when they switched over to the computer age, and they had to take a lot of that information and send it to the federal government through computers. A lot of people from the 80s got left behind on that. Now, that was one downfall of the 80s. Computers were just starting to come up. The internet was just coming up. And, at the end of the 80s. And when people's transcripts from school came over, I mean, you might have a straight A student and they said he got all F's. How can you even be a senior and have all F's? Today maybe it's possible. Back then it was impossible. You couldn't do that. I mean, they'd put you 2 grades back if you was a straight F student. Didn't matter what school you was in. If you ever see that on a transcript of yours, I would sue the crap out of my school. Man, that'd be a no. You can't be in the 12th grade and make straight F's. I'm sorry. It's they didn't tolerate it at that time, and everybody knows that. It was a different world then. Kings Island was number one. The number one amusement park in the world was in Mason, Ohio. Go look it up. Check it out. I'm not kidding. Kings Island, Mason, Ohio, when the original owner had it. And in the 80s, when he made that deal with Hanna-Barbera, that allowed him leeway to buy out all the investors that had invested in Kings Island with him, and he became the sole proprietor, I guess you'd call it, of Kings Island. All the investors were gone. It was him and his family. And Kings Island was so clean. We really enjoyed Kings Island when I was coming up. I had a season pass. I went like every other week. I was a spoiled kid, but I had manners. And I never cussed at my mother or anything like I see these kids doing nowadays. And I'm sitting back like, wow, really? Have we come to this? I mean, why would you want to have a child and your child cusses at you or puts his hands on you or her hands on you? Why would you want? I mean, come on. If I did that, man, they'd been picking me up from across the street. My dad would have beat my brains out, and justifiably so. You don't do your parents like that. And in the 80s, they didn't tolerate that sort of thing. If I'd have gone in and done something crazy at a school, my dad would have been in handcuffs standing next to me in the courtroom. I kid you not. Fathers were held responsible for the children that they brought into the world if they lived under the same roof. They were held responsible. And now we need to go back to that. That'll stop these school shootings and stuff. We got to take a stand somewhere. And if we go back to the way things were in the 80s, America would be much better off. There'd be less violence. There'd be a lot more equality. And this ain't a dig at all. I remember watching the Golden Bear on TV, man, when I was coming up, and we didn't have cable at that time. We just had aerial. And Jack Nicklaus was just a man on that golf course. And I used to sit back because I used to golf and, plan on going back to it. soon here. But yeah, when I used to golf, I mean that dude was the dude I watched. I mean, Jack Nicklaus, there'll never be another bear. I mean, he was the golden bear, the best of all time in my opinion, by far. Um, and we had, basketball. It was always the Lakers and the Celtics. The problem I had was I was fans of both, so I was always torn. You had Magic Johnson with the LA Lakers, and you had Larry Bird with the Boston Celtics, and they were both just iconic teams, man. Um, and they were in the playoffs against each other every year throughout the 80s. I mean, it was like every year in the 80s. It was like the Lakers and the Celtics, I believe. And, Mike Tyson came out of the 80s, you know, into the 90s, and he really made a name for himself. Mike's the man. So many great things came out musically, though, in the 80s that there's just nothing to compare to it, you know. No music in the history of mankind made the money that the 80s metal made, because they not only had music to market, they had a look to market, and then they marketed each individual in the band. Then they marketed posters, and they marketed, all these different areas, man. It was just, the industry was so tight. And honestly, the person that they say is to blame for that in the 80s was the manager of Led Zeppelin, of all people. He was an ex-professional wrestler. That is the story that I was told, and this is just what I was told, and people might disagree with me. But he was an ex-professional wrestler, and he became manager of Led Zeppelin on the promise that he would get them more money. So when they would go and play, he would walk into the office and he would say, this is how we get paid. And if they tried to say no or whatever, he would get a little out of hand, we'll say. And you would pay him, and that's what set the whole system up for the 80s. I mean, what they made in the 80s, there isn't any rappers, country music artists, except for maybe Garth Brooks. Maybe. And I say maybe very loosely on this one. None of them made even a quarter of what the guys like Poison and all them guys. Nobody made what them guys made. I mean, yeah, okay, they may be broke now or whatever. When you do drugs the way they were doing drugs, and you drink and party, and you're buying women, and you're hanging out with the hottest porn stars, and your money's gone, man. You got to have that Ferrari, you got to have that mansion, you got to keep that mansion up, and all of a sudden you quit producing music. The money's going to eventually run out. Okay. The money is going to eventually run out. Now, you've heard me slam on Nikki Sixx a little bit, but when I slam on Nikki, I really do look up to him. He's an iconic writer. I love when he was doing The Sixth Sense, I loved that. I hated his other band. I gotta be honest there. I'm just an old school Motley Crue head, man. I like the original lineup minus Tommy Lee. And I'm not the only one who says it now. Anybody who's followed that band for years, when you say Tommy Lee, we get ill. It's like, why you gotta bring him up? But, but now, to be fair, Tommy Lee is one of the better performers on the drums. I mean, he's very entertaining, with the whole roller coaster thing, and him being spun around while he's playing the drums, okay, fine. But Tommy, at the end of the day, you still cut your hair and you still sold out. Yep. The only two in that band, well, three in that band, and the other three members, I can't say that about. Doc McGee, he was in the '80s over that kind of music. He was manager actually of Motley Crue, Kiss. He was a manager of he had a management company, and he really was known to take care of his people. He was a really good guy to get in with, and as far as producers went, you had Bob Rock, you had Mutt Lang. I mean, come on, man. Nobody writes like that now. Nobody. And I mean, to be fair about it, Bob Rock would come in and help finish Motley Crue. Okay. That's a big difference from creating to finish. He would finish Motley Crue. Like he helped out with Dr. Feelgood. From what I understand, he came in and Nicky had already put all the work in. Bob came in and said, well, let's change this, let's do that, and let's do this, and let's get this thing recorded. Bing, bang, boom. And, sure enough, it was a hit. I see I got a couple people on right now. But anyway, yeah, the '80s music was just laid out differently, and probably the most iconic band of my day was Queen. I was behind the Led Zeppelin era. They had broke up by the time I got quote unquote old enough to really understand and listen to that type of music and catch what's being said and what they're talking about and all that. I was like behind Led Zeppelin. Not to say I wasn't a fan. I'm a big fan of Led Zeppelin. Love them. And this ain't a slap, but Queen was our Led Zeppelin in my generation. Freddie Mercury is probably the best singer of all time, hands down. And the magic that Queen had in the '80s has not been replicated and could never be replicated ever again. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody. How many people are going to go and originally write something like that? I mean, and on the flip side of it, just to throw another person out there that was iconic during the '80s, really broke out, became the king of pop, Michael Jackson. That was his heyday, before all the bad junk came out that he kept allowing himself to be pulled into because he didn't learn his lesson the first time. And people just did stuff to him to get money, and he was an easy target because he had a big heart. And that's where I'll leave that. But yeah, metal in the '80s, metal ruled the school. I mean, even the Hammer says it, and he was huge in the '80s. But metal ruled the school, and I would love to see another onslaught of metalheads come out like that. It would be refreshing after all the bull crap we've had to listen to and put up with. Country's dying, rap's dead. The blues is pretty much the only thing that's holding the test of time really now. And gospel music, they're doing well. But other than that, man, it's just, what do you do? It's like being given the time of your life and then having it taken away. That's the '80s. And it's hard to say that. And it's hard to admit that, but it's the truth. It's like you're given everything and then they came back and took it back. It was a very hard time to get over for everybody. Actors, regular people. When I say regular people, I mean guys working like myself, working factories, out there side busting. I mean, you want to be a man out of high school, go side bust. That job will make a man of you quick. Now, granted, when I was coming up, I mean, we was making $3.45 an hour, I think, $4 an hour. We didn't make no money, you know. That's why companies were so happy. I mean, but the cost of living was not that outstanding either. But still, yet, I mean, the companies were extremely happy because they would only have to pay people like $3.35 an hour. You know, like now they got to pay you like I guess it's like $8 an hour now or something, minimum wage. You know, which is a lot more than $3.35 an hour. A lot more. You know, um, I know they're asking for like a $20 an hour rate across the board now for minimum wage, which I don't think that'll ever happen. But because then everybody else would go up according to that, and the cost of living would just go through the roof because except for the sitting president and now nobody's got the guts to freeze the cost on everything to keep the cost of living the same while giving everybody a raise. And that's what should have been done. But anyway, just my opinion. But what I'm giving you about the 80s is factual. You can go look it all up. The 80s were just awesome. Check it out. You know, go check out, you know, the metal music and the metal scene. Slaughter, I mean, another great band. You know, I forgot totally about them. You know, Mark Slaughter was the man, you know, Flight of the Angels. You know, so many great bands that you can't even begin to name them. You know, the mainstream was Bon Jovi, of course, and Motley Crue and Poison and Def Leppard. But then you had bands like Fastway, Doro Pesh with Warlock, you know, uh, Joan Jett and the Black Hearts, which actually made their own record label because they couldn't get signed nowhere else. And that's smart, you know. If people like you and you draw an act, you should be able to afford to put together your own little gig and make. I mean, why allow somebody else like Warner Brothers the money when you can do it yourself? Unless you just want to get there fast. And if that's the case, then more power to you, you know. But anyway, that's enough rambling for right now. I could go on and on and on and on about the 80s, and I will talk again about it. Matter of fact, I'm going to do one on Kings Island from the 80s and the differences that I've seen from the last time I was there, which was just a couple years ago. From then back to the 80s, and the changes that were made and bad ideas and good ideas, and we're going to talk about it all. So stay tuned for that. And this is the Gator signing off from Defiance Illusion. Styles, my brother, what is up? Odin. Dude. What's up, man? Y'all be good out there. And this Defiance Illusion signing off, Dayton Strong. Peace.